I should tell you, before I get into the rest of it, that the posting I put in the Caldwell Station Gazette was not entirely dishonest. It was perhaps generous with the truth in a few places. Well-established ranch, the ranch existed, and it was established in the sense that I had been there 4 years and the sod walls were still standing. Near Caldwell Station, 4 hours by supply wagon, which is near relative to, say, the eastern seaboard, seeking a capable woman for partnership on a working cattle operation. Accurate. The cattle were working. Some of them anyway, the ones that hadn't wandered. I had been alone on the Callaway Flats for 4 years when I wrote that posting, and I want to be clear that I was fine. I had my journals. I had my maps. I'd been a cartographer before the planes got into me, and I stayed. And I still drew maps of the country around me with the particular obsessive precision of a man who needs something to do with his hands. I had 40 head of cattle, more or less, depending on how you counted, and whether you included the 3 that had a recurring habit of being somewhere I hadn't put them. I had a 1-room sod house, a half-built barn that had been half-built for 2 years because there was always something more pressing, and a dog named Pell who had his own opinions about most things and shared them freely. What I did not have was a conversation. 8 months by the time I wrote the posting. 8 months since the last supply wagon had come through with someone aboard worth talking to. I had been talking to Pell, which is not the same thing, and to the cattle, which is worse, and to my journals in a way that was starting to concern me when I read back through them. So I wrote the posting, and I waited. And on a Tuesday morning in late September, the supply wagon came up the Callaway Road with a trunk on top, and a woman on the seat next to Gus Prentice who ran the supply route, and Gus pulled up at my gate and said, "Brought you something, Aldous," with a particular expression on his face that I would later understand was the expression of a man who has spent 4 hours in close company with Willa Crane and has emerged from the experience with a new understanding of himself. She stepped down from the wagon. She was perhaps 35, with dark hair pinned up under a sensible hat, a traveling coat that had seen real use, and an expression of careful neutral assessment that I would come to know as her default register when confronted with new information. She looked at the sod house. She looked at the half-built barn. She looked at the 40 head of cattle visible in the near pasture, and at the 3 that were visible through the fence in the far pasture where they weren't supposed to be. She looked at Pell, who had come to the gate and was regarding her with his customary mixture of suspicion and hopefulness. Then she looked at me. "You wrote the posting," she said. "I did," I said. "Well-established ranch," she said. "It's established," I said. "I've been here 4 years." She looked at the sod house again, and near Caldwell Station. 4 hours, I said, by wagon. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mr. Aldous, I have come a considerable distance, and I am going to be honest with you about something." "Please," I said. "I expected something different," she said. "I know," I said. "However," she said, and paused, and looked out at the Callaway Flats, which were doing what they always did in late September, stretching out to the horizon in every direction under a sky so large it made you feel both very small and very awake. "However, I have also come a considerable distance. I would like to see the inside of the house before I make any decisions." I showed her the inside of the house. She stood in the doorway for a moment looking at it, the journals stacked on every available surface, the maps pinned to the south wall, the general state of organized chaos that results from a man living alone for 4 years with no particular reason to put things away, and she said, "How long has that pot been on the stove?" 3 days, I said. "What's in it?" "I'm not entirely certain," I said. She nodded slowly. Then she took off her coat and hung it on the hook by the door that I had put there for exactly this purpose and never used, and she said, "I'll need somewhere to put my trunk." I moved 6 journals off the chest by the east wall. She went back out, and she and Gus wrestled the trunk inside, and she opened it, and began unpacking with the methodical efficiency of someone who has been in difficult situations before and knows that the way through them is to make the immediate environment manageable. Gus caught my eye over her head and gave me a look that I read correctly as, "You're going to need to be better than you currently are." He drove away. Willa Crane unpacked her trunk. Pell sat in the doorway and watched with his ears up. That was how it started. The first week was an education. Not for her, for me. Willa had apparently arrived with a complete picture of what needed doing and a sequence for doing it in, and she worked through this picture with the same calm efficiency she'd brought to unpacking the trunk. The pot on the stove was dealt with first, then the journals were organized, not thrown out. She was clear about that, but organized, which it turned out was possible, and which I had not previously attempted. The maps on the south wall she looked at for a long time before she said anything. "You drew these," she said. "Yes," I said. "They're good," she said. "Not warm, not effusive, just accurate." "Thank you," I said. "What did you do before this?" she said. "Cartographer," I said. "Government survey work. Plains mapping mostly." "And then you stayed." "And then I stayed," I said. She looked at the maps for another moment. "The creek bend here," she said, pointing. "Is that accurate? It looks like it moves west about a quarter mile past the cottonwoods." "It does," I said. "In a wet spring it moves another 50 yards beyond that. I've got 3 versions of that section from different years." She looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her before, something that wasn't quite approval but was in that direction. "Show me," she said. I showed her. We spent an hour at the maps that afternoon, which was not what I'd expected from the first week, and which was the first indication that Willa Crane was not what I'd expected either. What I'd expected, if I was honest with myself, which the first week was making increasingly necessary, was someone who would manage the house and learn the cattle routine and fit herself into the shape of what already existed. What I got was someone who was making decisions about the shape of things and expecting me to have opinions about them, which was fine except that I had spent 4 years not having to have opinions about anything except cattle and maps, and opinions, it turned out, required practice. "The half-built barn," she said on the 3rd day. "Yes," I said. "How long has it been half-built?" I considered the truthful answer. 2 years, I said. She looked at me. "What's stopping you finishing it?" "I keep meaning to," I said. "That's not what's stopping you," she said. "No," I said. "What is?" I thought about it. "I think," I said slowly, "that when it was half-built I could keep telling myself I was going to finish it. If I finish it and it's wrong, there's no more telling myself." Willa looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "That's the most honest thing I've heard since I got here." "I've been working up to it," I said. She didn't quite smile, but something shifted in her face, a fraction of an inch, that I filed away without knowing yet what to do with it. By the end of the first week, the house was manageable. By the end of the second, it was something I hadn't expected it to be, which was comfortable. Not in a soft way, not decorated or transformed, but in the way of a space where things were where they were supposed to be, and the air was different because someone else was moving through it. Willa had a routine that I had no part in establishing, and which I found myself falling into without deciding to. Up before me, coffee made by the time I came in from the morning check on the cattle, the day's priorities identified and usually stated plainly before I'd finished the first cup. She did not ask me what I needed doing. She looked at what needed doing and told me what she thought the order of operations should be, and then she looked at me to see if I agreed, and when I did we got on with it, and when I didn't we talked about it until one of us changed our mind, which went about 50-50. I found this arrangement suited me more than I would have predicted. She was reading my journals. I noticed this on the 4th day. One of the older ones was on her side of the table with a strip of cloth marking her place, which was not where I'd left it. I didn't say anything for 3 days. On the seventh day she said, without looking up from the one she was currently in, "You were watching a storm from the ridge in March of '76. I was, I said. You wrote 4 pages about it. It was a significant storm, I said. The description of the light is accurate, she said. I saw it today, not as strong, but the same quality, the way it goes green before it goes dark. I looked at her. You noticed that? I noticed things, she said. She turned a page. You should put these in order. They're in order, I said. They're in the order you wrote them, she said. That's not the same as order. I opened my mouth and then closed it, because she was right. And I knew she was right, and the particular quality of being right that Willa had plainly, without triumph, just as a statement of fact, made it impossible to argue with. What order? I said. I'll show you, she said, after supper. She showed me after supper. It took 3 evenings, and it was, I'll admit, considerably better than what I'd had before. By subject and then by season, so that you could follow a single element, the creek, the cattle, the weather patterns on the Callaway Flats, across multiple years. She did it with the same methodical attention she brought to everything, and I watched her do it and thought about a woman who had come for a gentleman rancher and was reorganizing a cartographer's journals in a sod house at the edge of the plains, and I thought, something is happening here that I did not anticipate. October came in cold. The Callaway Flats in October are not a gentle place. The wind comes down off the high country to the northwest, and it comes without apology, and the temperature drops 30 degrees between noon and midnight, and the cattle bunch in the corners of the pasture, and you spend more of your day than you'd planned moving them back to where the windbreak is. I had done this alone for 4 years. Doing it with Willa was a different experience. She rode well. I hadn't known this until the second week, when she asked about a horse, and I put her on the bay mare and watched her take the mare from a walk to a canter in about 45 seconds with the ease of someone who'd been doing it her whole life. She caught my expression and said, "My father kept horses. Did the posting say I couldn't ride?" "It didn't specify," I said. "Then there's no misrepresentation on my side," she said, with the particular dryness that was becoming familiar, and rode off to check the east fence line, which she'd identified 3 days ago as the section most likely to fail in a windstorm and which she was right about. We worked the cattle together through October, and I found that what had been a solitary and sometimes dispiriting operation became something else with 2 people, faster, and also more interesting. Because Willa had opinions about cattle that were different from mine, and sometimes better and sometimes worse, and always worth knowing. "That one," she said one afternoon, pointing at the roan steer who was the ringleader of the 3 persistent fence breakers. "What about him?" I said. "He's going to take the other 2 with him again," she said. "He's been watching that section of fence for 3 days." "You've been watching him for 3 days," I said. "One of us has to," she said. She was right. He went through 2 days later, and the other 2 went with him, and we spent most of a cold afternoon collecting them, and when we got back to the house Willa made coffee and said, "Sell him in spring." "He's a good steer otherwise," I said. "He's a bad influence," she said. "Cut your losses." I sold him in spring. The fence problems largely resolved themselves. It was in November that I understood something I had been not quite understanding since September. We had been at the house for the evening, the wind going steadily at the west wall the way it did in November, and I had been working on a map of the north section of the flats where I'd found a spring-fed depression in October that wasn't on any of my previous surveys, and Willa had been reading. She'd brought books, a crate of them, which had been the other thing in the wagon besides the trunk, and which Gus Prentice had carried in with the expression of a man who had not expected this. And the lamp was going, and Pell was at Willa's feet, which he had started doing sometime in October, the trader, and it was quiet in the particular way that a house is quiet when 2 people are comfortable in it. She said, without looking up from her book, What does this area look like in spring? The Callaway Flats. In general, she said, what does it become? I thought about it. I tried to describe it, the grass coming up, the color of it against the sky, the way the creek ran high and the cottonwoods leafed out, and the whole enormous landscape did the thing it did in spring where it suddenly looked like a place someone could live rather than a place someone was surviving. I talked for longer than I usually talked. She listened without interrupting, then she said, I want to see that. I looked at her. You're planning to be here in spring, I said. That depends on several things, she said, but at the moment, yes. She turned a page. Is that surprising? A little, I said. She looked up from the book then and looked at me with the direct expression I'd learned to pay attention to. You wrote a posting that promised more than it delivered, she said. The ranch is smaller than you described. The settlement is farther, and you had been alone long enough that you were, by your own admission, somewhat feral. I did admit that, I said. You also fixed everything I pointed at, she said. You reorganized 11 years of journals without complaining once it became clear I was right about the system. You told me an honest thing about the barn on the third day when you could have told me something easier. And you are, in fact, a better cartographer than any posting in a county gazette has a right to claim. She looked back at her book. The ranch is not what I expected. You're also not what I expected. On the whole, I find the second surprise more interesting than the first one was disappointing. I sat with that for a while. Willa, I said. Wren, she said without looking up. I'm glad you didn't get back on the wagon, I said. I considered it, she said, the first day. What decided you? She was quiet for a moment. The maps, she said. A man who draws the country that carefully is paying attention to something. I wanted to know what else he was paying attention to. I went back to my survey of the North Flats Depression. The lamp burned steadily. Pell snored at her feet. The wind went on at the west wall. Something had happened that I hadn't mapped, and I found I didn't mind not having it on paper. The hard part came in January. A blizzard moved in off the high country on the 7th, and it was serious. The kind of serious that announces itself the day before with a particular quality of silence, the animals knowing before the barometer does. I got the cattle into the near pasture with the windbreak, and as much feed as I could haul before the light went, and Willa had the house provisioned, and the water situation managed with an efficiency that I no longer found surprising but still found impressive, and we settled in. The blizzard lasted 4 days. On the second day, the roof of the half-built barn gave way under the weight of the snow. I heard it go, a sound like a slow exhalation, something structural deciding it was done. I told Willa what it was. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, The cattle are in the near pasture. Yes, I said. Then the barn was empty. Yes. Then we deal with it after, she said. There's nothing to be done in this. She was right. I knew she was right. I sat with it for the rest of that day, the half-built barn that had been half-built for 2 years, the thing I'd kept meaning to finish, finished now in the worst possible way. Willa made supper and didn't talk about it and did not talk about it, just let me sit with it, which was what was needed. On the third evening she said, Tell me what you wanted it to be. The barn, I said. Yes. I told her. Not just the practical specifications, the size, the layout, the drainage, but the other thing, the way I'd imagined it standing against the Callaway sky, solid and permanent, the thing that would make the spread look like a place that intended to stay. I hadn't said any of this to anyone. I'd been carrying it in my journals obliquely. She listened to all of it, then she said, We'll build it right this time, in spring. I know what I'm doing with a frame. You know carpentry, I said. My father kept horses and built things, she said. I was useful to him. Of course you were, I said. She looked at me. Was that a compliment? It was, I said. It was also slightly condescending, she said. It was also slightly condescending, I agreed. I apologize. She accepted this with a nod and went back to her book, and I sat there in the blizzard thinking about a woman who knew carpentry and had a crate of books and reorganized journals and told me the truth about my posting without cruelty. And I thought, I have been mapping the wrong things. The blizzard broke on the 11th. We went out together into the aftermath, the snow deep and hard-crusted, the sky the washed-out blue of a world that has been through something. And we walked the property and assessed the damage, which was the barn roof, a section of fence on the north side, and 4 cattle that had to be dug out of a drift where they'd gotten themselves comprehensively stuck. Willa dug cattle out of a snowdrift with the same focused competence she brought to everything else, and when the last one was free and indignantly trotting back toward the others, she straightened up and pushed the hair off her forehead and looked at the wreckage of the barn roof and said, "Square frame construction, steeper pitch. We'll use the timber from this, most of it's still good." "You've already planned it," I said. "I've had 4 days," she said. We walked back to the house through the snow, Pell bouncing ahead of us in the drifts with the enthusiasm of a dog who had been inside for 4 days and had strong feelings about it. And I thought about the right moment, and then I thought, there is no right moment, there's just this one, and this one is as good as any. "Willa," I said. She looked at me, reading my face with the attention she gave most things. "Yes," she said. "I'd like to ask you something," I said. "You've been working up to it for about 3 days," she said. "Since the 2nd day of the blizzard," I admitted. "Ask then," she said. "The posting I wrote," I said. "It wasn't entirely what I described. The ranch, the distance, all of it. You came for something I didn't quite deliver." "That's true," she said. "But you're still here," I said. "Also true," she said. "I'd like you to keep being still here," I said. "Not as the arrangement from the posting, as something else. Something that's what this actually is, which is 2 people who suit each other in ways neither of us expected, and are better at everything with the other one here." Willa looked at me for a long moment. The Callaway Flats stretched out around us, snow-covered and enormous and absolutely silent after 4 days of blizzard, and Pell sat between us looking from one to the other with his ears up. "The barn," she said. "What about it?" I said. "If I stay," she said, "we build it right. Square frame, steeper pitch, my design." "Your design," I said. "And you finish things when you say you're going to finish them," she said. "No more half-built anything." "Agreed," I said. "And you tell me when something is bothering you, instead of going quiet for 3 days and hoping I won't notice." "I'll try," I said. "That's not the same as agreed," she said. "Agreed," I said. She looked at me for another moment, then she said, "Then yes, something else, the thing this actually is." We shook hands on it, which was very Willa, and then she walked on ahead through the snow toward the house, and I stood there for a moment in the aftermath of the blizzard, with the biggest sky I knew above me, and thought about a cartographer who had mapped everything within 50 miles of this spot, and had somehow missed the most important thing until it stepped off a supply wagon and told him his pot had been on the stove for 3 days. I went inside. Willa had the stove going and the coffee on. Pell was back at her feet. "The posting," I said. She looked up. "Next one will be more accurate," I said. "There won't be a next one," she said. "No," I agreed, "there won't." Spring came the way spring comes on the Callaway Flats, not gently, not all at once, but in the particular incremental way of a place that has earned the right to take its time. The grass came up pale first, then deepened. The creek ran high with the melt. The cottonwoods leafed out along the south bank. We built the barn in April. Square frame construction, steeper pitch, her design. I did what I was told and learned things I hadn't known about framing, and Willa built with the focused precision of someone who had been thinking about this barn since January and intended to get it right. By the end of the month it was standing, actually standing, properly standing. The way I'd imagined it for 2 years, except better, because I hadn't imagined it with Willa's pitch on the roof and the east-facing window she'd added for the morning light. We stood in the doorway of it one evening in late April, the Callaway Flats going gold in the late sun, the cattle in the near pasture, Pell at our feet. "Well," Willa said. "Well," I said. "It's better than what you described in the posting," she said. "Most things turned out to be," I said. She looked at me sideways. Was that a compliment to me? "It was," I said. "It was also slightly." "It was just a compliment," I said, "nothing else." She considered this. "All right," she said, "accepted." The sun went down over the Callaway Flats and the sky went through its colors. Orange first, then the deep rose, then the particular blue of a plains evening that I had tried to describe in my journals many times and never quite gotten right. I'd been trying for 11 years. I thought I might try again tomorrow, with Willa reading over my shoulder to tell me where I'd gotten it wrong. It was, I had come to understand, a considerable improvement on trying alone. I've been asked, since by Gus Prentice mostly, who takes a particular interest in the matter, what I would have done if Willa had gotten back on the wagon that first day. The honest answer is that I don't know. I'd have gone on, probably, mapped the North Flats in more detail, talked to the cattle, finished the barn eventually or not, kept writing in my journals in a way that was starting to concern me. But the more honest answer is that I can't quite picture it, not because the before was so bad, but because the after is so specifically what it is. Willa reorganizing journals, Willa on the bay mare checking the east fence, Willa telling me the roan steer was a bad influence and being right. Willa in the blizzard, calm and decisive, already planning the barn she was going to build when it was over. She came for a gentleman rancher. She found a half-wild cartographer with 40 lean cattle, a half-built barn, and a dog with opinions. She assessed all of it with the same careful neutrality she'd had stepping off the wagon, and she decided, on the evidence, to stay. That's the thing about Willa Crane. She looked at what was actually there, and she made her decision based on that, not on what was promised or expected or advertised. She decided the Callaway Flats were worth the distance. She decided the maps were worth the journals. She decided I was worth the honest answer. The barn is standing. The 3 breakaway cattle have been replaced with better-tempered animals who stay where they're put. Pell is still at her feet. And I have been trying, with considerable effort and moderate success, to finish things when I say I'm going to finish them, which is, as Willa would tell you, still a work in progress but a good faith one. I consider that to be approximately the right place to end up.